2 a.m. Dead quiet, Texas night. I'm sleeping in my grandfather's canvas tent by our family's spring-fed lake when suddenly, whumph, whumph, whumph. A police helicopter's rotor blades shatter the silence. Spotlight hits me like a prison break. 3 squad cars scream down my dirt road, red and blue lights bouncing off the water. I stumble out in boxer shorts, hands up, squinting against that blinding beam. The metallic taste of adrenaline floods my mouth. "Sir, you're trespassing on private HOA property," the lead officer shouts. "Officer," I say, still half asleep, "this is my land. Check your coordinates." 50 yards away, HOA President Delilah sits in her golf cart filming everything, her perfectly manicured nails tapping the steering wheel. She's practically glowing with satisfaction. Here's the kicker. They had no idea they'd been trespassing on my property for 2 years. What would you do if neighbors called SWAT on you for camping on your own land? Drop a comment from wherever you're watching. Your HOA nightmares probably top this insanity. My name's Garrett, and 8 months ago, I inherited 40 acres of Texas ranch land from my grandfather Ezra, including a gorgeous 3-acre spring-fed lake that's been in our family since 1940. I'm 47, work as an industrial electrician, and my recent divorce left me struggling to pay those hefty property taxes alone while working 60-hour weeks. But this place is worth every penny of sacrifice, especially that lake where morning mist rolls off the water like silk, and you can smell cedar and mesquite mixing with the earthy scent of cattle from neighboring pastures. Granddad had an open-door policy here. Local families fished and swam for free, making him a legend in Millbrook County. The original survey stakes are still visible, rusted but readable, marking boundaries unchanged for 80 years. Then suburban sprawl hit our quiet corner like a plague, and everything changed when Lakeshore Estates sprouted up 2 years ago, a fancy development that brought with it the most dangerous species known to rural Texas, an HOA president named Delilah Thornfield. This 52-year-old woman drives everywhere in a spotless white BMW SUV, and you can smell her overpowering lavender perfume before you see her. The sharp click-click-click of her designer heels on pavement announces her arrival like death approaching, and she carries herself with the condescending smile of someone who's never been told no in her life. Delilah used to be on city council until she lost re-election amid embezzlement rumors that folks still whisper about at Ruby's Diner, and now she runs this HOA like her personal kingdom. After a particularly brutal week rewiring an industrial plant, my hands cut up from cable work, my back screaming from crawling through tight spaces, I decided to do what Granddad always did when life got heavy. I grabbed his old canvas tent and headed to the lake for some peace. That first night was pure magic. The campfire crackled and popped, my instant coffee tasted like heaven from Granddad's dented metal cup, and for the first time in months I could hear myself think over the gentle lapping of water against the shore. Dawn brought the rumble of approaching engines and dust clouds billowing behind Delilah's BMW as she led a convoy down my dirt road. She climbed out with 2 nervous HOA board members, waving official-looking papers like she was serving a federal warrant. "This lake belongs to our residents now, sir," she announced, her perfectly manicured nails drumming against her clipboard with the rhythm of a machine gun. "This water feature is community property according to our HOA covenants, and you're trespassing." The woman actually called my grandfather's lake a water feature, like it was some decorative fountain in a strip mall. I stood up slowly, still holding my coffee cup, feeling the morning heat already starting to build. "Ma'am, my family's owned this land since before your subdivision was a cow pasture." "Not according to our easement rights," she snapped, thrusting those papers closer to my face. The smell of her perfume mixed with the dust she'd kicked up made my eyes water. "You have until sunset to remove your illegal camping equipment, or we're calling law enforcement." Standing there watching her heels click back toward that pristine BMW, I felt the bitter taste of dust settling in my mouth as I reluctantly started breaking down Granddad's tent. The truth hit me like a sledgehammer. I'd never actually reviewed all of his property papers thoroughly, just signed the inheritance documents and started paying taxes. That was my first mistake. My second mistake was underestimating just how far a desperate woman with a law degree and too much time on her hands would go to steal what wasn't hers. But Delilah had made one crucial error herself. She assumed I'd roll over and play dead like every other person she'd bullied in her life. 1 week later, I drove back to the lake expecting another peaceful camping trip, but what greeted me made my stomach drop like a broken elevator. An 8-foot chain-link fence stretched across my lake access, gleaming in the afternoon sun like a steel middle finger pointed directly at my family's legacy. Security cameras perched on fresh concrete posts like mechanical vultures, and bright yellow signs screamed, "No trespassing, Lake Shear Estates property," in letters bold enough to read from space. The metallic clang when I shook that locked gate echoed across the water, mixing with the smell of still-curing concrete and my rising fury. These people had actually fenced off my grandfather's lake while I was pulling a 60-hour work week, then slapped their name on it like conquistadors planting a flag. Standing there listening to water lap against the shore just 20 feet away, now separated from me by galvanized steel and pure audacity, I realized this wasn't just about property anymore. This was war. I drove straight to the county courthouse, my hands still shaking with anger, where I met Dolores, a 70-something clerk who'd known my grandfather since the Eisenhower administration. "Your granddaddy was good people," she said, her weathered fingers pulling dusty files that smelled like old paper and decades of bureaucratic battles. "Something ain't right about this fence business." 2 hours later, we struck gold. Delilah's HOA had filed an adverse possession claim 18 months ago, essentially trying to steal my land through legal paperwork. Here's a knowledge nugget every property owner needs tattooed on their brain. Adverse possession in Texas requires 10+ years of continuous, open occupation before you can legally claim someone else's land. The HOA's claim was premature by about 8 years, making their fancy fence nothing more than expensive criminal trespassing equipment. The takeaway? Always verify the legal basis for any neighbor's property claims before you let them intimidate you. Using divorce settlement money that was supposed to buy me a new truck, I hired Marcus Webb, a property attorney who looked like he bench-pressed law books and had the kind of reputation that made opposing counsel break out in stress sweats. Marcus reviewed the survey documents and discovered something beautiful. Their fence extended 15 feet onto my surveyed property, meaning they weren't just blocking my access, they were literally stealing my dirt while calling me the trespasser. Marcus filed a temporary restraining order so fast it left skid marks on the courthouse steps, and watching the sheriff serve those papers to Delilah was worth every penny of legal fees. Her perfectly composed mask slipped for exactly 3 seconds, revealing the cornered animal underneath all that suburban sophistication. But cornered animals bite back harder. At the next HOA meeting, Delilah launched a character assassination campaign that would make a political operative proud, spreading rumors about me being unstable and dangerous. She claimed I'd threatened her during our lakeside encounter. Complete fiction, but lies travel at light speed through subdivision gossip networks. I could practically hear the whispers spreading through phone calls and mailbox conversations, each retelling adding another layer of manufactured drama. My security camera captured something even more interesting. Late-night visits from golf cart commandos measuring and photographing the fence line like they were planning some suburban black ops mission. The plot thickened when I discovered the fence contractor was Delilah's brother-in-law's company, because nothing says legitimate business transaction like keeping the corruption in the family. Then came the knockout punch. I requested building permit records for their fence construction, and guess what? They'd never filed permits with the county, making their 8-foot monument to property theft completely illegal from day one. You can't just erect structures without proper permits, even if you're an HOA president with delusions of grandeur and a law degree from the University of Pinterest Legal Advice. Marcus filed additional complaints about unpermitted construction, and suddenly Delilah's perfect little fence project became a ticking time bomb. The county building inspector scheduled a visit, and I could taste the sweet irony in the Texas heat. These people had tried to fence me out using illegal construction methods while calling me the lawbreaker. But this victory felt hollow because I knew it was just round one. Bullies don't retreat when their first punch gets blocked. They escalate like fire spreading through dry grass. Delilah had thrown her opening shot with that fence, and I'd countered with legal paperwork that hit harder than a sledgehammer. Now she was angry, embarrassed, and desperate, which made her infinitely more dangerous than when she was just arrogant. The smell of fresh concrete from her illegal fence posts would soon be replaced by the acrid scent of her plans crumbling. But first, she had several more weapons in her arsenal of suburban warfare. 3 weeks after the fence fiasco, Delilah struck back with surgical precision. She filed a complaint with the state environmental agency claiming I was polluting the pristine lake water with illegal camping activities, alleging everything from septic violations to chemical contamination. The woman had weaponized environmental protection laws like a suburban eco-terrorist, and sitting in Marcus's office reading her complaint, I remembered what he'd told me during our first meeting. When people file false reports with government agencies, they're committing felonies called filing false instruments, and prosecutors love these cases because the evidence is already documented. When State Inspector Rodriguez arrived Tuesday morning, I felt my first real stab of worry. This guy was professional, thorough, and carried testing equipment that looked like NASA hardware. The irony tasted bitter as copper pennies, watching an expert test water that had been pristine for 80 years because some HOA president needed ammunition for her land grab. Rodriguez methodically collected samples, the sound of water gurgling into glass vials mixing with mockingbirds that seemed to laugh at the whole charade. 20 minutes later, Rodriguez stood up wearing the bewildered expression of a man whose morning had been completely wasted. "Sir, this is some of the cleanest natural water I've tested in my 15-year career," he said, double-checking his digital readings. "Your lake tests better than municipal drinking water." What exactly is the environmental concern here? His confusion was music to my ears, but I knew this was just another chess move in Delilah's game. I requested a copy of her original complaint through open records, something my divorce attorney had taught me was always worth doing when dealing with vindictive people. Reading Delilah's submission was like watching someone commit literary suicide in real time. She'd alleged illegal sewage dumping, chemical contamination, and ecosystem destruction, painting me as some environmental villain destroying pristine wilderness. Every single claim was verifiable fiction, lies documented under penalty of perjury that would come back to haunt her. Marcus filed a defamation counterclaim that detonated Delilah's strategy like a controlled demolition. And suddenly she wasn't just fighting a property dispute. She was staring down potential criminal charges. The smell of her desperation practically oozed through the legal documents, but her environmental complaint backfired spectacularly by awakening people who actually mattered. Buck Hensley, a 70-year-old cattle rancher who'd been fishing my grandfather's lake since Harry Truman was president, called that evening with righteous fury crackling through the phone lines. "Son, your granddaddy was the finest man I ever knew, and this HOA horseshit has gone far enough. What do you need?" Buck provided sworn testimony about the lake's historical usage and my grandfather's impeccable environmental stewardship, creating a paper trail that obliterated Delilah's pollution narrative. Even better, newer HOA residents started questioning why their monthly assessment fees were funding expensive lawsuits instead of fixing their crumbling infrastructure, exactly the kind of internal pressure that makes HOA boards nervous. That's when Delilah abandoned any pretense of legality and dove headfirst into criminal behavior. My security cameras captured everything, shadowy figures moving through the darkness, dumping motor oil near the lake's edge to create rainbow sheens that reeked like a truck stop parking lot. Someone called the EPA reporting fresh contamination, but the second inspection revealed the beautiful truth. Oil dumped recently and deliberately, clearly not from camping activities. The inspector's report noted evidence of intentional environmental sabotage, shifting the entire investigation from pollution control to criminal mischief. I installed motion-activated floodlights that could illuminate a baseball stadium, turning my property into a high-security zone that would catch any nighttime saboteurs. The results exceeded my wildest expectations. Vernon, Delilah's nervous accountant board member, got caught in my spotlight beam like a deer in headlights, frantically attempting to plant garbage bags near my favorite camping spot. The pure terror on his face when those floods erupted was better than any movie, frozen mid-crime with evidence literally in his hands. "This isn't what it looks like," he stammered, dropping the bags like they were nuclear waste. "Really?" I called out, zooming my camera for a perfect close-up. "Because it looks exactly like felony evidence tampering." Vernon abandoned those garbage bags and sprinted to his golf cart faster than an Olympic sprinter, leaving behind physical proof that any prosecutor would love. Restaurant trash with receipts showing deliberate purchase for planting evidence. The pattern had crystallized into something undeniable. Every time I countered Delilah's moves with documented facts and legal pressure, she escalated to increasingly desperate and blatantly criminal tactics. What began as a civil property dispute had metastasized into a full-blown criminal conspiracy involving false government reports, environmental sabotage, and evidence tampering. The acrid smell of motor oil contaminating pristine water had been replaced by something far more toxic, the the stench of Delilah's entire strategy decomposing from within. But watching her self-destruct was just the appetizer before the main course of her downfall. 2 months into this legal war, Delilah launched her most despicable attack yet. She convinced the HOA board to file a lawsuit claiming my grandfather's will was invalid, alleging that Ezra had dementia and couldn't legally transfer property. The woman had stooped to grave robbing my dead grandfather's reputation just to steal his land, and reading those court documents felt like watching someone urinate on a war memorial while demanding a standing ovation. Her evidence was a masterpiece of creative fiction that would embarrass tabloid journalists. A grocery store clerk claimed Ezra seemed confused during checkout 6 months before his death, apparently forgetting whether he wanted paper or plastic bags constituted legal incompetence in Delilah's universe. Another neighbor swore my grandfather had trouble remembering names, as if an 87-year-old man occasionally blanking on someone's identity proved he was mentally unfit to own property. She sought an emergency injunction to lock me out of my inheritance entirely while courts sorted through her manufactured evidence. Then this suburban sociopath made it brutally personal. A private investigator started shadowing me like a discount spy movie, snapping photos from bushes with camera shutters that sounded like mechanical insects. The constant feeling of being watched made my skin crawl, while Delilah spread details about my divorce and financial struggles throughout the community like a gossip virus designed to destroy my reputation. Anonymous flyers appeared on windshields claiming I was mentally unstable and potentially dangerous, complete with unflattering surveillance photos that made me look like a wanted criminal. The humiliation burned worse than physical pain, having my private struggles weaponized by someone whose biggest hardship was probably choosing between BMW colors. Marcus brought in Sarah Chen, an estate attorney with the kind of shark-like reputation that made opposing lawyers consider career changes. Sarah's investigation demolished Delilah's dementia narrative faster than a controlled explosion. My grandfather's medical records showed razor-sharp mental acuity until his final day, while bank statements proved he'd been managing complex investments without assistance for decades. Dr. Patricia Vance, Ezra's longtime physician, provided testimony that would make Delilah wish she'd never heard the word dementia. Ezra was discussing intricate estate planning strategies just weeks before his death. His mind was not only clear, but exceptionally organized for someone half his age. The medical evidence was overwhelming. My grandfather could have run Microsoft, much less transfer property to his grandson. Buck Hensley organized the Defense of Ezra's Memory Committee, rallying locals who remembered my grandfather's legendary generosity. Families came forward with stories of Ezra helping during emergencies, providing free lake access, and lending money without expecting repayment. The community support was touching, but more importantly, it created dozens of witnesses who could testify to my grandfather's mental sharpness and moral character. Sarah's financial investigation struck oil when she discovered Lakeshore Estates was bleeding money like a severed artery. Several expensive lots had sat unsold for over a year. The HOA faced crushing special assessments for infrastructure repairs, and desperate homeowners were panicking about their investments. Delilah needed those property values to skyrocket, not for community benefit, but for personal financial survival. Then Sarah found the smoking gun that would end this war. HOA board meeting, minutes obtained through Texas open records laws, something I'd learned about during my own divorce proceedings when tracking down hidden assets. These minutes contained explicit discussions about acquiring lake property through sustained legal pressure and strategies for forcing me into bankruptcy through attorney fees. One quote made my blood pressure spike like a broken gauge. "If we can pressure him into financial ruin, we could acquire the lake for pennies on the dollar and increase property values by 20%. They documented their conspiracy to destroy me financially, creating a prosecutor's dream case with their own meeting minutes as evidence. The deeper Sarah dug, the more rotten the foundation became. Delilah owed $180,000 in back taxes and judgments, with her house already in foreclosure proceedings. She desperately needed HOA property values to explode just to avoid personal bankruptcy, making this entire campaign about saving her own financial skin rather than community development. But Delilah had committed one fatal error that would ultimately destroy her entire operation. She'd failed to disclose her massive financial conflicts to the other board members. During my divorce, my attorney had explained how fiduciary duty works. When you're entrusted with other people's money or decisions, you must disclose any personal interests that might influence your judgment. Undisclosed conflicts of interest can void board decisions and expose officers to personal liability that their insurance won't cover. Armed with documented proof of conspiracy, financial fraud, and breach of fiduciary duty, I finally had the nuclear weapons needed to end this suburban Cold War. The taste of impending victory was sweeter than my grandfather's famous morning coffee, but watching Delilah's empire crumble would be even more satisfying. She still had one more desperate move left before her house of lies collapsed completely, and knowing her track record, it would be spectacular. 3 months into this legal nightmare, while organizing my grandfather's papers for Sarah's estate defense, I stumbled across a discovery that would detonate Delilah's entire world. Hidden in a secret compartment of Ezra's old roll-top desk, the kind of hiding spot that whispered, "Family secrets live here," I found documents that flipped this war completely upside down. The musty smell of decades-old paper mixed with my grandfather's lingering Old Spice cologne as I carefully unfolded maps and deeds that crackled like kindling, their edges yellowed with age but their legal significance diamond sharp. The original 1940s deed and survey maps told a story that made my heart pound like a bass drum. These weren't just property documents, they were smoking gun proof that Delilah's precious Lakeshore estates had been built partially on land that legally belonged to my family for over 80 years. My grandfather, being the generous soul he was, had probably noticed during construction but never said anything, figuring it wasn't worth fighting neighbors over a few feet of dirt when he owned 40 acres of Texas. But those few feet of dirt contained their clubhouse and main access road. I hired Miguel Santos, a professional surveyor whose GPS equipment was more precise than NASA navigation systems, to verify what those yellowed maps suggested. Standing in the crisp morning air watching Miguel work felt like being an archaeologist uncovering King Tut's tomb, except this treasure came with legal ramifications that would give Delilah nightmares for years. Miguel's findings were poetry written in property law. Lakeshire Estates Clubhouse, their gleaming community center where Delilah held court like a suburban dictator, sat 15 feet onto my grandfather's surveyed property. The golf cart path connecting their development to the county road, another 12 feet of unauthorized occupation that they'd been using daily for 2 solid years. The cosmic irony was so perfect it felt like divine intervention. While Delilah had been screaming about me trespassing on her property, her entire HOA had been trespassing on mine every single day. Every board meeting, every community event, every time someone drove a golf cart to their mailbox, trespassing on Ezra's land. Sarah's financial investigation had already exposed Delilah's desperation. $180,000 in crushing debt, house in foreclosure, and legal judgments that threatened to destroy her completely. But now the full scope of her criminal conspiracy crystallized like ice forming on a windshield. Court documents revealed she'd convinced other financially struggling board members that acquiring lake access would increase property values by 20%, essentially recruiting accomplices for her personal financial rescue mission disguised as community improvement. When HOA board members act for personal financial gain rather than resident benefit, they breach their fiduciary duty and expose themselves to personal liability that no insurance policy will touch. Sarah's legal research during my divorce had taught me that corporate protection disappears when officers commit fraud, leaving them personally responsible for every dollar of damage. This revelation transformed me from defendant to prosecutor. Instead of just defending my inheritance, I could launch a trespassing lawsuit demanding $50,000 in damages for 2 years of unauthorized land use, plus removal costs that would financially obliterate their struggling HOA. The clubhouse relocation alone would cost more than most people's houses. The power dynamic had reversed so completely it felt like watching gravity work backwards. Delilah's legal position wasn't just weak, it was catastrophically radioactive. She attempted a desperate settlement offer through Marcus, essentially begging me to keep the lake if I'd drop the trespassing claim and promise not to demand clubhouse removal. But after months of harassment, character assassination, and attempts to desecrate my grandfather's memory, mercy wasn't on the menu. Delilah had spent so much energy trying to steal what belonged to me that she'd never verified what actually belonged to her community. Now she was about to learn the most expensive lesson of her life. Ignorance of property law isn't a defense. It's just bankruptcy with extra steps. The moment I realized I held Delilah's destruction in my hands, everything changed. This wasn't just about defending my property anymore. This was about delivering justice so complete and devastating that no HOA president would ever again think they could steal from hardworking families without consequences. Sitting in Marcus's office surrounded by evidence of Delilah's crimes, I felt like a general planning D-Day. Except instead of liberating Europe, I was liberating my grandfather's legacy from suburban fascism. Marcus assembled our dream team with the precision of a military operation. Sarah Chen would demolish the estate challenge using medical evidence that would make Delilah's dementia claims look like conspiracy theories. Miguel Santos documented every inch of boundary violations with GPS precision that could guide space missions, proving 2 years of daily trespassing that added up to grand theft by golf cart. But our secret weapon was Jessica, Marcus's paralegal who could track money through financial records like a forensic accountant hunting war criminals. Jessica's investigation revealed fraud so extensive it should have come with its own federal task force. Delilah had charged residents special assessments for a legal defense fund, without mentioning the money funded her personal land grab rather than legitimate community protection. During my divorce proceedings, I'd learned that homeowners have absolute rights to detailed accounting of assessment spending, knowledge that now felt like having insider information on the stock market. The financial bombshell that would end Delilah's career came when Jessica discovered how assessment fraud works legally. Misrepresenting the purpose of HOA fees constitutes theft by deception, carrying the same criminal penalties as armed robbery. Delilah had stolen over $75,000 from her own neighbors under false pretenses, making every Lakeshore Estates resident a victim of her crimes rather than a beneficiary of her leadership. Buck Hensley transformed into a grassroots organizer who would make political campaign managers jealous, creating phone networks that connected every longtime resident who remembered my grandfather's legendary kindness. Dr. Vance prepared medical testimony that would obliterate Delilah's mental incompetency narrative, while neighbors shared stories painting Ezra as a community hero rather than the confused old man Delilah claimed existed only in her imagination. The media strategy ignited when Thomas Rivera smelled the story that would define his journalism career. The rhythmic sound of his printing press working overtime mixed with the intoxicating smell of newsprint and ink as he prepared exposés that would broadcast Delilah's corruption to the entire county. Thomas's investigative instincts, sharpened during 2 decades covering local corruption, uncovered financial connections between Delilah's desperation and her property theft that read like a crime thriller. Professional videography captured the full scope of HOA violations with cinematic clarity. Drone footage revealed their clubhouse sitting on Ezra's land like a monument to bureaucratic theft, while time-lapse photography documented daily trespassing by residents who had no idea their community center was built on stolen property. The visual evidence was so overwhelming that even Delilah's mother would have trouble defending her. The Had Justice for Ezra social media campaign exploded across Texas like digital wildfire, generating support from property rights activists who recognized this battle's implications for every homeowner facing HOA abuse. Our GoFundMe account raised more money in 2 weeks than most people see in annual bonuses, proving that Americans everywhere were sick of petty tyrants who weaponize homeowner associations for personal enrichment. But my favorite element was the psychological warfare component. Every weekend, I camped at the lake in full view of Lakeshore Estates, setting up grandfather's canvas tent exactly where it belonged while staying completely within my legal rights. Campfire smoke drifted toward their expensive houses like incense at a funeral for their property values, mixing with acoustic guitar melodies that provided peaceful soundtrack to their legal nightmare. Watching HOA residents question their president's sanity through binoculars was entertainment better than cable television. Jessica discovered the nuclear weapon that would vaporize any remaining support Delilah might have retained. She'd never disclosed her crushing financial conflicts to other board members, violating Texas laws requiring HOA officers to reveal personal interests affecting their judgment. This violation could void every decision she'd influenced and expose her to personal liability that would follow her to bankruptcy court and beyond. Our legal strategy was beautiful in its devastating elegance: countersue for trespassing, defamation, harassment, and breach of fiduciary duty, while demanding punitive damages that Texas courts love awarding when defendants act with malicious intent. Marcus explained that punitive awards often exceed actual damages when behavior is particularly outrageous, and Delilah's conduct had been Olympic-level outrageous for months. As we positioned every piece for the final assault, I could taste victory like the metallic charge before lightning strikes. Every legal weapon was loaded, every ally was briefed, and every piece of evidence was organized for maximum devastating impact. The only remaining question was whether Delilah would surrender with dignity or go down swinging like the desperate criminal she'd become. Either way, her reign of suburban terror was about to end in spectacular fashion. Delilah's desperation reached new depths of pathetic creativity when she hired a social media consultant to wage digital warfare against my reputation. Fake negative reviews about me appeared on Google, Yelp, and Facebook, claiming I was running an illegal business from the property and terrorizing peaceful neighbors with late-night construction noise. The constant ping of notification alerts on my phone became a soundtrack of harassment, each false accusation tasting like metallic stress in my mouth as I documented every lie for our legal arsenal. Anonymous complaints flooded multiple government agencies like a coordinated attack designed to drown me in bureaucratic quicksand. The fire marshal received reports of dangerous campfire activities. Animal control got calls about aggressive wildlife feeding, and the health department investigated potential contamination of groundwater supplies. Each false report required time off work to meet with investigators, costing me wages, while Delilah's vindictive campaign tried to destroy my livelihood through administrative torture. Then she staged what could only be described as the worst performance since high school theater. Delilah called 911, claiming I'd threatened her during a terrifying encounter near the lake, complete with dramatic descriptions of aggressive behavior that would have impressed soap opera directors. Paramedics and police responded to find a perfectly healthy woman with normal vital signs and a story that changed every time she told it. "Ma'am, your blood pressure is completely normal," the paramedic said, checking his equipment twice. "What exactly happened here that constituted a medical emergency?" He looked at me menacingly, Delilah stammered, apparently having exhausted her creative reservoir for fictional threats. The responding officer's report noted no evidence of any disturbance or threat, but the false emergency call wasted taxpayer resources and added another documented lie to our growing collection of Delilah's criminal behavior. I was learning that desperate people don't just make bad decisions. They make spectacularly stupid decisions that create evidence trails leading straight to prison. While Delilah played amateur actress, I quietly upgraded my security system to capture everything in high-definition detail. Additional cameras with audio recording capabilities turned my property into a surveillance fortress that would document any future sabotage attempts or false flag operations. Every false complaint and its subsequent dismissal by authorities created another piece of evidence showing a clear pattern of harassment designed to intimidate me into abandoning my legal rights. The harassment escalated when Vernon approached me privately with a cash offer that reeked of desperation and criminal intent. "Look, we'll pay you $25,000 to drop the lawsuit and walk away," he whispered, glancing around nervously like a drug dealer making a street corner transaction. What Vernon didn't know was that my security cameras were recording everything, including his clumsy attempt to secretly record our conversation using his smartphone. "Sir, are you trying to obstruct justice on camera?" I asked, making sure my voice carried clearly to the recording equipment. Vernon's face went whiter than fresh snow as he realized he'd just committed a felony while being recorded committing another felony. In Texas, recording private conversations without consent is illegal, and attempting to bribe someone to drop legitimate legal claims constitutes obstruction of justice. Two crimes Vernon had managed to commit simultaneously while providing me with video evidence of both. The sabotage attempts grew more brazen and correspondingly more stupid. Someone cut the fence on my property boundary, allowing Buck's cattle to wander onto HOA land, where they proceeded to leave natural fertilizer donations across the pristine golf cart paths. Delilah called animal control, claiming dangerous livestock invasion, apparently unaware that cattle have been wandering Texas longer than HOA presidents have been ruining neighborhoods. Buck identified the cattle as his own and confirmed they'd been deliberately released by cutting fence wires. Criminal mischief that carried serious penalties when combined with the false animal control report. The smell of fresh manure mixing with Delilah's expensive perfume when she arrived to document the crisis was poetry written in bovine excrement. The media manipulation reached new levels of desperation when Delilah contacted local TV news with staged photographs of property damage allegedly caused by my camping activities. She claimed I was terrorizing a peaceful neighborhood with environmental destruction that existed only in her imagination and creative photo editing software. Thomas Rivera fact-checked her story with the thoroughness of an investigative journalist exposing political corruption, contacting every source and verifying every claim. When the TV station interviewed Buck and Dr. Vance for Balance, the narrative shifted so dramatically that Delilah's credibility evaporated like morning dew under Texas sun. Meanwhile, the HOA filed a motion claiming my lawsuit was frivolous while seeking sanctions and attorney fees, the legal equivalent of a bank robber calling the police to report theft. Sarah responded with a brief that methodically documented every piece of evidence supporting our claims, contrasting our factual foundation with Delilah's house of lies. Courts don't appreciate litigants who cry frivolous lawsuit while simultaneously engaging in actual frivolous conduct. And Sarah's response brief read like a prosecutor's opening statement in a criminal trial. Delilah's legal position wasn't just weak, it was radioactively toxic, contaminating everything she touched with the stench of desperation and criminal misconduct. 4 months into this suburban Cold War, Delilah decided to weaponize city bureaucracy like a desperate dictator launching her final offensive. She convinced her remaining city council ally to challenge my property's agricultural zoning, claiming that camping violated residential use restrictions and seeking an emergency zoning hearing to ban overnight stays entirely. Multiple city departments suddenly discovered permit violations that had never existed before, like government agencies coordinating a siege designed to crush me through regulatory harassment. The bureaucratic blitzkrieg was impressive in its scope and pathetic in its transparency. A building inspector arrived claiming anonymous complaints about unpermitted structures, scrutinizing my grandfather's 80-year-old cabin like it was a nuclear facility. The fire marshal questioned campfire safety protocols with the seriousness of someone investigating arson, while the health department launched investigations into potential contamination of a water source that had tested cleaner than most municipal supplies. The sound of clipboards flipping and official stamps hitting paperwork created a rhythm of intimidation that would have impressed Soviet bureaucrats. But every inspection ended the same way. No violations found, no legitimate concerns identified, and another documented example of government harassment orchestrated by Delilah's vindictive campaign. I welcomed every inspection with the enthusiasm of someone whose property could pass military standards, documenting each official's statements confirming no violations existed. Every clean inspection report became ammunition for our harassment case, and I was learning that public officials' statements during investigations are discoverable in court proceedings, knowledge that would soon become very expensive for Delilah. The pressure campaign expanded to target my livelihood when anonymous letters arrived at my employer claiming I was unstable and potentially dangerous, attempting to destroy my electrical contractor job through character assassination. The letters included surveillance photos and detailed descriptions of my erratic behavior that read like fiction written by someone who'd never met me. My supervisor, Ray, a 30-year veteran who'd seen every variety of workplace drama, called me into his office with the kind of expression that usually preceded pink slips. But instead of firing me, Ray documented the harassment attempts and confirmed that employers can't discipline workers for exercising legal property rights, an employment law principle that would add wrongful termination to Delilah's potential liability exposure. The community fracture reached critical mass when HOA residents split into warring factions that made family holiday dinners look peaceful by comparison. Delilah called a special meeting to discuss mounting legal costs, but instead of rallying support, she accidentally revealed the financial disaster her vendetta had created. Legal fees already exceeded $75,000 with no end in sight, and residents faced additional special assessments that would make mortgage payments look affordable. "We moved here for peace and quiet, not expensive lawsuits that benefit nobody," complained one resident whose property taxes were already stretching their retirement budget. "Sometimes you have to fight for property values," Delilah snapped back, apparently unaware that her fight was destroying the very values she claimed to protect. The meeting devolved into open rebellion as residents realized their monthly assessments had funded a personal vendetta disguised as community protection. Several families announced plans to sell and move rather than continue subsidizing Delilah's legal war, creating the exact property value decline she'd supposedly been preventing. Court-ordered depositions revealed the full scope of Delilah's financial desperation, like surgery exposing terminal cancer. She'd borrowed against her house to invest in speculative land development adjacent to the lake, gambling borrowed money on schemes that required stealing my property to become profitable. Her testimony read like a case study in how not to invest in real estate. No due diligence, no proper surveys, and no backup plan when the primary strategy involved theft. The district attorney's office opened a criminal investigation after reviewing the pattern of false reports, staged emergencies, and evidence tampering that had characterized Delilah's campaign. A sheriff's detective interviewed witnesses about the fake medical emergency, the motor oil dumping, and Vernon's attempted bribery, building a criminal case that would follow Delilah long after the civil litigation ended. The sound of handcuffs clinking and police report forms rustling became background music to Delilah's crumbling empire as prosecutors prepared charges for filing false instruments, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to commit fraud. The HOA's insurance carrier recommended immediate settlement after reviewing the liability exposure that exceeded their policy limits by several multiples. Insurance companies are businesses that don't cover intentional misconduct by officers, and Delilah's behavior had voided coverage faster than a drunk driver cancels auto insurance. "We don't insure criminal conspiracies," the insurance adjuster explained to the board. "Your president's actions have exposed every homeowner to personal liability that could cost more than your houses are worth." The settlement pressure intensified when remaining board members realized they faced personal bankruptcy defending Delilah's crimes. But she refused to accept reality, even as her world collapsed around her like a house built on quicksand. Her final desperate measures would soon make everything that came before look like practice rounds for the main event that would end her reign of suburban terror permanently. The county commissioner's court meeting on a sweltering Tuesday morning in July would become the stuff of local legend, packed tighter than a concert venue with residents, media, and rubberneckers drawn by the promise of suburban justice finally being served. The agenda listed our dispute as a simple resolution of property dispute, but everyone in that courthouse knew they were about to witness the public execution of Delilah's reign of terror. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead while wooden chairs squeaked under the weight of anticipation thick enough to cut with a chainsaw. Local TV news cameras positioned themselves for maximum drama, their operators sensing that this small-town property dispute had all the elements of a viral sensation: corruption, conspiracy, and comeuppance delivered with Texas-sized justice. Thomas Rivera live-streamed the proceedings for his newspaper website, drawing viewers from across the state who'd followed the hashtag Justice for Ezra campaign like a real-life David versus Goliath story. Buck led our delegation of longtime residents into the courthouse like a general marshaling troops for the final battle, their weathered faces showing the kind of determination that built Texas in the first place. Dr. Vance carried my grandfather's medical records in a folder thick enough to stop bullets, while Miguel had survey maps and GPS data that would demolish any remaining questions about property boundaries. I kept my presentation simple and factual, letting the evidence speak louder than any emotional appeals could manage. The timeline of harassment displayed on projection screens told a story of escalating criminal behavior that would have impressed organized crime prosecutors. Survey maps showed HOA trespassing so blatant it looked like intentional theft rather than honest mistakes. "Commissioners, I'm not asking for anything except what's legally mine and what my grandfather intended when he left me this land," I said, my voice carrying across the packed courtroom. "Every document, every inspection report, and every witness statement proves the same thing. This HOA has been trespassing on my property while calling me the criminal." Delilah's turn at the podium resembled a masterclass in how desperation destroys credibility. Sweat beaded on her forehead under the TV lights as she delivered an emotional plea about dangerous precedents and community safety that sounded like campaign speeches written by someone losing an election badly. Her voice shook with nervous energy, while her hands gestured frantically, painting me as some kind of environmental terrorist threatening peaceful suburbanites. "This man represents everything wrong with selfish individualism destroying planned communities," she declared, apparently unaware that her own criminal behavior had already destroyed any community she claimed to protect. Then Sarah delivered the mic drop moment that would be replayed on social media for years. She approached the commissioner's microphone carrying a small recording device, her expression showing the kind of confidence that comes from holding nuclear weapons in a knife fight. "Commissioners, I'd like you to hear something that perfectly captures the true nature of this dispute," Sarah announced, pressing play on audio that filled the courthouse with crystal-clear sound quality. Vernon's voice echoed through the speakers. "Look, we'll pay you $25,000 cash to just go away and drop this whole thing." Then my voice, steady and clear. "Sir, are you trying to obstruct justice on camera?" The courthouse erupted like a stadium after a touchdown, gasps and angry murmurs rolling through the crowd as people realized they'd just heard attempted bribery broadcast in surround sound. Vernon, sitting in the back row, tried to shrink into his chair like a vampire exposed to sunlight. A sheriff's deputy approached Vernon during the meeting, handcuffs ready for their starring role in this public humiliation. The metallic click of restraints and shuffle of feet as Vernon was led away created a soundtrack that would haunt Delilah's nightmares for years to come. "You have the right to remain silent," the deputy announced loud enough for everyone to hear, though Vernon had already gone silent as a tomb. Commissioner Johnson read the summary of HOA financial investigations that revealed the full scope of assessment fraud, $127,000 in resident fees spent on personal vendettas disguised as community protection. 3 board members resigned on the spot, their letters of resignation creating more paperwork than a government shutdown. The audience reaction sounded like a sports crowd watching their team score the winning touchdown. Angry murmurs from HOA residents who'd paid those assessments mixing with satisfaction from longtime locals who'd supported my grandfather's memory throughout this ordeal. The commissioners voted unanimously to support my property rights, with their resolution condemning abusive legal systems for personal financial gain, becoming part of public record that would discourage similar schemes across the county. The county attorney announced criminal investigations of remaining board members, turning what started as a civil property dispute into a criminal conspiracy prosecution. Thomas Rivera's live blog post documenting the meeting went viral within hours. Justice for Ezra trending across Texas as people shared stories of their own HOA nightmares and celebrated seeing corruption finally face consequences. When TV reporters asked how I felt about vindication, my answer was simple. I just wanted to honor my grandfather's memory and enjoy the land he left me. Sometimes you have to fight for what's right, even when the system seems stacked against you. Delilah's attempt at reconciliation afterward rang hollow as a broken bell. 6 months later, the legal dust had settled like morning mist clearing from my grandfather's lake, revealing a landscape transformed by justice so complete it felt like Ezra himself had orchestrated every detail from beyond the grave. The court awarded me $89,000 in damages plus attorney fees, money that tasted sweeter than victory because it came from the woman who'd tried to steal my inheritance while calling me the criminal. Texas property law ensures that prevailing parties in boundary disputes recover attorney fees, which meant Delilah's conspiracy had bankrupted her while teaching me that fighting bullies sometimes pays actual dividends. The HOA was forced to remove their illegal fence and pay trespassing penalties that drained their community fund faster than a punctured water balloon. Delilah's house entered foreclosure within weeks of the judgment, and she slunk away from the community she'd terrorized like a defeated dictator fleeing revolution. The poetic justice was so perfect that neighbors still talk about it during barbecues and block parties. A newly elected HOA board publicly apologized at their first meeting, the sound of genuine applause echoing through the community center that had been built on my stolen land but now operated with actual integrity. They voted unanimously to rescind all legal actions and established policies requiring full financial disclosure for future board decisions, ensuring no future president could weaponize assessments for personal vendettas. Property values stabilized once the legal uncertainty ended, proving that expensive lawsuits destroy communities more effectively than any individual landowner ever could. Neighbors who'd crossed the street to avoid me during the controversy now wave from golf carts and stop to chat when I'm camping, creating the genuine community spirit Delilah had claimed to protect while systematically destroying. Using the lawsuit proceeds, I established Ezra's Legacy Fund and organized an annual fishing tournament that benefits local youth programs while honoring my grandfather's tradition of sharing this natural treasure with anyone seeking peace and healing. Buck serves as volunteer coordinator, teaching children to cast lines in the same water where Delilah once staged fake emergencies, turning a battlefield into a classroom for environmental stewardship and community values. The tournament provides free fishing lessons for underprivileged kids, outdoor survival skills, and most importantly, examples of how communities heal when good people refuse to let corruption win. Watching children laugh while learning to bait hooks where helicopters once circled feels like victory measured in generations rather than legal judgments. My weekend camping routine has become a source of strength rather than controversy. The peaceful ritual of morning coffee by water's edge mixing with bacon cooking over campfire and fish jumping in water cleaner than most municipal supplies. The canvas tent that once triggered SWAT raids now represents something more powerful, the fundamental right to enjoy your property without bureaucratic harassment. Thomas Rivera's reporting won a state journalism award for exposing HOA corruption, while our case became required reading in Texas law schools teaching property rights advocacy. Multiple similar lawsuits have used Marcus's legal strategies, creating precedents that protect homeowners from future HOA abuse, while establishing that residential associations aren't above the law they claim to enforce. The financial recovery allowed me to pay off divorce debt and fund lake improvements that honor my grandfather's environmental legacy. A small dock and picnic area welcome visitors just like Ezra intended, while native plant restoration projects protect the spring-fed ecosystem for future generations. The lake has been designated a wildlife sanctuary in my grandfather's honor, ensuring this natural treasure remains protected from development schemes that threaten rural Texas. Educational programs bring school groups who learn about water conservation and environmental stewardship, creating awareness that extends far beyond property boundaries into the hearts of children who grow up understanding that some things are worth fighting to protect. Looking ahead, I'm helping my neighbor Jake fight his own HOA battle over a workshop they're trying to demolish. Wait until you hear what happens when entitled board members mess with a retired Marine who builds custom motorcycles for disabled veterans. If you've survived your own HOA nightmare, share your story in the comments below. I read every single one because we're building a community where neighbors help neighbors instead of filing lawsuits against them. Your story might be featured in a future episode, so don't hold back on the details. Make sure to subscribe to HOA Stories and smash that notification bell for more David versus Goliath battles where the little guy actually wins. Remember the most important lesson from this whole mess. Know your property boundaries, document everything, and never let bullies intimidate you into surrendering what's rightfully yours. My grandfather would be proud that his land still brings people together, creating the kind of community he always envisioned.
Thank you for tuning in to HOA Stories, where neighbors stand up against HOA Karens and karma comes a-knocking. If you like this story, hit that like button, share your thoughts below, and subscribe for more HOA tales and real-life neighborhood drama each week.